Hello, everybody. So this video is going to be all about cells. And like we talked in a previous video, we said that cells are the fundamental unit of all living organisms. So all living things are made of cells. Okay, so let's talk about what cells are. There are different types of cells. And even within a living organism that is multicellular, there are different types of cell within one organism. Okay, but first I want to talk about the major classifications of cells. There are three different categories of cell types. Okay, so I'm going to write, so this is how I'm going to introduce it to you. I am going to draw a phylogenetic tree. And so the way we're going to draw this is we're going to start it here. And I'm going to explain to you that this is where life started. Okay, so I'm going to draw a little line here. This is the beginning of life. This was 4 billion years ago. Okay, and so this is not when Earth started. Earth was around for billions and billions of years, and what happened was Earth changed, and Earth came to a place where it could sustain life. And so 4 billion years ago, in the ocean, next to some hot vents in the ocean, some molecules came together and formed the very first living organism, which was a one-celled bacteria. Okay, so 4 billion years ago, a very simple unicellular organism started. And from there came everything else. So this happened 4 billion years ago. And so then what happened was one group, I'm going to draw a line like this. So right here at this point where the two branches come apart, that is like an ancestor of all living organisms. And what happened is one group evolved into one thing, which is bacteria, and the other one evolved into something else. Okay, so normally how that happens is two groups form and they're split up from each other. And then the two groups don't intermate with each other. Okay, so they don't mix genetically. And so then one group evolves one way and another group evolves another way. And over millions of years, they change. Okay, so I'm just talking about the three different types of cells right now. So this branch here, I'm just going to say present day is bacteria as we know it. Okay, so we can see bacteria. There are millions and millions of different kinds of bacteria. They are everywhere. They are inside our bodies. They are on our bodies. They are all over every surface on the whole planet. And so that is one type of cell, is a bacteria cell. Okay, then another group formed, another type of cell, and these are called archaea. And archaea are also very, very simple. That's how you spell it. And they are like bacteria, where they are just simple unicellular organisms, and they have some differences though in their cells, so they are put in a different category. And then the last group is called eukarya. Okay, so these are the three major types of cells there are on our planet. And they are different, they're put in different categories because their cells look different fundamentally. Okay, so I want to point out some things. Bacteria and archaea together are called prokaryotes. So I'm going to circle these two groups of organisms. These are called prokaryotes. And I'm going to give you some generalities about prokaryotes. And then this branch here are called eukaryotes. So you can categorize cells into two types. Okay, on the eukaryotic line here, there are some types of cells that you are familiar with that I'm going to put on here. And I want to point out that this is just kind of like a big tree of life, and there are millions of different organisms. But of course, I'm not going to draw all that because you can't. There's too many. But I'm going to put some big ones on the eukaryotic line since that's what we're familiar with. So I'm going to tell you that plants evolved here. And then fungi evolved. And fungi are its own category. They're not a plant. And then animals evolved. So I'm just going to put that here. Okay, and so when you think of living organisms, you can put them in any of these categories. Okay, and so this is like the tree of life. Okay, so there are, we're talking about cells. All living things are made of cells, and prokaryotic cells are different than eukaryotic cells. And that's what I'm talking about in this video, the differences. So let me just make a list of the two types of cells and what's in them. Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to say prokaryotes. What I'd like to do is make two lists side by side, and we can then compare them, like as I talk about each one. So prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Okay, let's see here. So let's see, a prokaryote are what we said were bacteria and archaea. I'm going to pull in a picture so you can just kind of see what I'm talking about as I talk about it. Okay, here we go. Let me pull a picture in here. Okay, so this is kind of a big picture. And so here it is. And these are cartoon pictures. These aren't real. I'll show you a real one in a second. But a prokaryotic cell are very simple cells. Okay, let me make this a little bit bigger. And they were the original cells, so there wasn't much to them. There isn't much to them still. And so a couple of things I want to point out is a prokaryote are always unicellular. Okay, so I'm going to make a list here. Prokaryotes are always unicellular. Which means that all prokaryotic organisms are made of one cell. Eukaryotes, some of them are unicellular, but some of them are multicellular. So I'm going to put unicellular, cellular, and multicellular. Okay, so an example of a prokaryotic cell is a bacteria. An example of a eukaryotic cell is one of our cells, okay? And we're obviously a multicellular, we have trillions of cells. But there are some unicellular eukaryotes. For example, an amoeba is a eukaryote and it's only made of one cell, okay? Amoeba are found in like fish tanks and ponds. They live in the water. Okay, another difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is they have DNA in them. Okay, all cells have DNA, and the prokaryote has DNA, and it's right here, this purple stuff. And so it's just like this DNA that's just all jumbled up in the middle of the cell, just floating around in the cell. Where in the eukaryote, the DNA is inside the nucleus. So it's in this protective covering. Okay, so I'm going to write this down. Okay, the prokaryote, the DNA is floating around. And it's floating around in the liquid inside the cell. The liquid inside the cell is called cytoplasm. So I'm going to say DNA is floating around in the cytoplasm. Whoops, sorry, it's all slanty. Okay, and eukaryotes, the DNA is held inside a compartment called a nucleus. So DNA is inside Oops. An organelle called the nucleus. Okay, and so here you can see the nucleus is this orange ball, and the DNA is held inside there, and it's extra protected. And I want to point out that an organelle is anything inside a cell that has a membrane. And eukaryotes have lots of organelles. Prokaryotes have 0 organelles. So I'm going to say in prokaryotes, there are no organelles. And in eukaryotes, there are organelles, many organelles. And again, an organelle is any structure that has a membrane. Okay. What else? So let's talk about some of the organelles in the eukaryote. Okay. Let's see. Wait, before I do that, I want to talk about the DNA a little bit more. So the DNA in a prokaryote there's just one piece, and the one piece of DNA is a circular piece. So I want to write this down. So we're just making a list where we're comparing prokaryotes to eukaryotes because those are the two major types of cells. So in a prokaryote, the DNA is one piece. And in a eukaryote, DNA is many pieces. Okay. And I wonder if you know how many pieces of DNA we have in our cells. Do you know? These pieces that we have of DNA in our cells are called chromosomes. And do you know how many chromosomes we have? I'll let you think about that. Okay, so the DNA is only in one piece, so it only has one chromosome in a prokaryote, so in a bacteria, and that DNA is a circular piece. So the DNA is circular. Okay. In eukaryotes, the DNA is linear. So the DNA is in pieces called chromosomes. All the chromosomes in a eukaryotic organism like us are in straight up and down pieces. Our chromosomes are up and down. In a bacteria, a prokaryotic organism, there's just one piece of DNA and it's in a circular piece. So that chromosome is in a circle. Okay, so that's kind of weird. It's different. So a couple more things I want to point out. In a prokaryote, there are these structures that are not organelles that are called ribosomes. Ribosomes are where proteins are made. So ribosomes, I'm going to say, are small. Well, I'm first going to say ribosomes are where proteins are made. And we talked about proteins in a previous video, are made. And remember, a protein is a little machine that your cell's going to make usually to do chemical reactions. It's like a protein is usually an enzyme. Enzymes do chemical reactions. Your cells are making proteins all day long. And so the proteins are made on the ribosomes. Remember, proteins are made of amino acids. But in a prokaryote, the ribosomes are little. They're small guys. Okay, so I'm going to say ribosomes are where proteins are made and they are small. Okay, so a prokaryotic ribosome is small. A eukaryotic ribosome is large. I'm going to say are bigger. Not a whole lot bigger, but they are definitely different. So if you looked at a ribosome, you could tell if it was a prokaryotic ribosome or eukaryotic ribosome based on the size. What else? Okay, So I want to talk about some of the things that are found in a eukaryotic cell. So I'm going to pull in a picture of an animal cell. And remember, eukaryotes have lots of different branches. There are plants and fungi and animals. But I just want to focus a little bit on an animal cell. And then I'm going to show you a plant cell. Okay, so I'm only talking about eukaryotes now. So here is just the animal cell. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about prokaryotes right now. I'm only talking about a eukaryotic animal cell. Okay, and so here is a cartoon picture of one. And I just wanted to highlight some of these structures that we find in our cells. Okay, so these are what our cells look like. And so I already mentioned the nucleus. So I'm going to just make a list here of different things that are inside the cell. So there's a nucleus. I already told you that the DNA is in there. So the nucleus is this orange thing. These green things that are attached to the nucleus are called endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so that's this green thing. And what this does is there are two parts of the endoplasmic reticulum. There is a smooth endoplasmic reticulum and there's a rough endoplasmic reticulum. And so in this picture, you can see this lighter green over here is the smooth ER is what we call it. And then over here where you see the red dots, those are called the rough ER. So I'm going to say the smooth ER is where lipids are made. Lipids are made. Okay, and lipids are very important. We talked about fats and lipids in a previous video, and all membranes are made of phospholipids, and all organelles are made have membranes, including the cell has a membrane. So all the lipids are made here. Okay, and then we have a rough ER. And the rough ER has these little red dots on it, as you can see, and those are the ribosomes. So rough ER has ribosomes, and those little ribosomes are like little balls, and they make the surface look rough, which is why we call it rough ER. And the ribosomes, like I just said, are where proteins are made. Okay, then I want to point out this big purple thing here is called a Golgi. Golgi complex. Sometimes it's called a Golgi apparatus. And the Golgi is where proteins are fixed. So a protein is made on a ribosome, but then it has to go to the Golgi to get like packaged up. Okay, so it gets modified. So Golgi complex are where proteins go to get fixed. To get fixed up. Okay. And so just, a fresh protein will go there first before it gets released. Okay, then a couple more things I want to point out before I let you go is there are these big orange things here. These are called mitochondria. You might have heard of them before. So mitochondria is where energy is generated. Okay, and the energy that the cell generates is called ATP. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little aside here that this energy that I'm talking about here is a molecule called ATP. We're going to talk about this in a future video, but I just want to introduce it here that ATP is made in your mitochondria. It's very important. ATP is needed to do anything. Okay, all this moving I'm doing, the thinking I'm doing, the talking, my heart pumping, my hand moving, all requires ATP. And so your mitochondria in all your cells is generating ATP all the time. And it makes this ATP by using the food that you eat. okay? We'll talk about that later. Let's see what else. So these blue lines here are called cytoskeleton. And the cytoskeleton does several things. One, it gives the cell its shape. Another thing is it keeps all the organelles in place so that when you're jumping around, your organelles are not like, getting all, messed up. What else? And also it provides like kind of a infrastructure, like a roadway for things to be transported from one side of the cell to the other side of the cell. And so another thing I want to point out here are these little red dots. Those are also ribosomes. So there are ribosomes that are stuck to the roughy R. See those red dots here? But there are also ribosomes that are floating around in the cytoplasm. So I'm just going to put free floating ribosomes. Okay. So I'm just introducing all these structures to you. We are going to go into detail about some of them as the class continues. But the last thing that I want to do before I let you go is I want to show you a picture of a plant cell, which is another eukaryotic organism. And so plants are fascinating and amazing. And plant cells are eukaryotes also, but they have 3 extra features that animal cells do not have, okay? So I'm going to do this in green, of course, because plants are green. So I'm just going to say a eukaryotic plant cell. Plant cell. So a eukaryotic plant cell has everything that an animal cell has. Okay, so I'm going to say has all the similar structures, has all the same structures that an animal cell has, plus 3 more. Plus 3 more things. One thing is that a plant cell has a cell wall. Okay, so the cell, like the animal cell, does not have a cell wall. Okay, so on the outside here, it has a cell membrane. The cell membrane is oily, like we talked about, made of lipids. And the plant cell also has a cell membrane, but it also has a cell wall outside of the membrane. Okay, and so plant cells have this, animal cells do not have this. So I'm going to say cell wall. The cell wall is made of cellulose. And cellulose is a carbohydrate that is made of a bunch of glucose molecules. Okay, the second thing that a plant cell has is this huge water bubble here. It's called a central vacuole. Central vacuole. And it is this big white like pool that's in the middle. And what it does is it holds water. Okay, and it also holds other things, but mostly water. And it's the largest structure in a plant cell. And when the water is low in the central vacuole, the plant gets kind of like wilty, so it gets kind of sad. And that's when you know you need to water your plant. Okay, the last thing that a plant cell has that an animal cell does not have is this very important thing called a chloroplast. Okay, and here is the chloroplast here. So I'm just going to put a big arrow here. It's this big green thing. Okay, and the chloroplast is where the plant is able to do photosynthesis. So it does photosynthesis here. And photosynthesis is the ability to take some sunlight and make food. Okay, and so it's really amazing. So plants are the organism on our planet that makes the food. So they are the base of the food chain. Everything you eat comes from a plant. Okay, all the food on the planet for all living organisms come from plants, and the plants use the sunlight to make that food through this process called photosynthesis. So it's this kind of really amazing thing that they do for us. We would not be able to live without them making food. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you're having a great day today, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.